The media directs your attention to the sky, to missile shields like the Golden Dome, designed to intercept high-cost kinetic threats. This is a deliberate misdirection. The 21st century battlefield is not about intercepting what you can see. It is about surviving what you cannot. The primary vector is not hypersonic. It is silent. It travels at the speed of light through the 1.3 million kilometers of subsea fiber optic cable that constitute the global economy's central nervous system. This is not a war of explosions. It is a war of erasure. An attack that severs these connections is a systemic kill shot to the world's digital ledger. The accelerant for this strategy is economic insolvency. When a state's currency collapses, as seen with Iran's rial, the mathematical calculus of conflict inverts. They are forced to abandon symmetrical warfare and weaponize the vulnerabilities of their solvent rivals. The cost of a conventional missile is prohibitive. The cost of a cable-cutting drone is a rounding error. The return on investment is infinite. These are not theoreticals. They are probes. The failed cyber attack on the Polish power system was a test of systemic resilience. These are low-cost reconnaissance missions to map the West's critical failure points. The next vector is orbital, satellite blinding, jamming or dazzling the sensors that underpin GPS, financial transactions, and launch-on-warning protocols. This protocol creates the blind Leviathan, a solvent superpower, stripped of its sensory input, its market data, its navigation, its secure communications, becomes a disoriented giant. Its immense kinetic arsenal is rendered impotent by a foe it cannot locate. This is the engineered liability, a state of such intolerable strategic paralysis that the only remaining solvent response is preemptive, system-wide escalation. The motive for asymmetric escalation is not conquest, it is solvency. When a state's balance sheet collapses, its leadership is mathematically forced into a single strategic option: convert their domestic liability into a systemic liability for their rivals. The objective shifts from winning a war to creating an intolerable cost that forces a negotiation. CSIS analysis frames Russia's pivot not as a tactical adjustment, but as a response to a solvency crisis. The high kinetic cost and political unpopularity of a protracted conventional war created a severe domestic liability. This internal pressure necessitated a pivot to cheaper, higher leverage asymmetric vectors to impose costs on Western rivals and their allies. This playbook is universal. Consider the massive cyber attack on Poland's power system in December. While reported as a failure, the attempt itself is the signal. It demonstrates a low-cost, deniable probe of critical NATO infrastructure. This is not a military gambit. It is an economic attack vector designed to test vulnerabilities for future exploitation at scale. The accelerant is always internal economic collapse. Reports confirm Iran's currency hitting 1.47 million per dollar, fueling domestic uprisings. For a regime facing this level of insolvency, targeting a rival's systemic vulnerabilities, economic, cyber, or low-cost kinetic, is no longer a choice. It is a mathematical certainty, the only remaining lever to ensure regime survival. The core of the asymmetric threat is an economic equation. A recent analysis from RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, codifies the new kinetic cost basis. On one side of the ledger, a $5 million main battle tank, the apex of industrial-era power projection. On the other, a $500 first-person view drone. This is a 10,000 to 1 cost disparity. The objective of the drone is not kinetic parity. It is to transform the tank from a strategic asset into a crippling economic liability. This delta in lethality-to-cost ratio is termed the democratization of violence. The state monopoly on effective kinetic force is broken. For an actor facing a systemic solvency crisis, such as Iran, with its currency collapsing to over 1.4 million per dollar, this is not a strategic choice, it is a mathematical imperative. They cannot afford symmetric warfare, so they are forced to weaponize the low-cost vectors that bypass traditional defenses, from swarms of drones to cyber attacks probing critical infrastructure, as seen in the attempted strike on the Polish power system. The solvent power is now forced into a bankrupting defensive posture. Protecting a single 5 Malos tank from a potential swarm of $500 drones requires layers of detection systems, electronic warfare jammers, and kinetic interceptors like the Golden Dome missile shield. The cost of defense radically outpaces the cost of the threat. The asymmetric actor wins not by destroying the tank, but by forcing its solvent rival to spend millions to protect it, thereby bleeding the adversary's treasury without firing a single conventional shot. This is the blueprint for systemic economic exhaustion. The battlefield is no longer a line on a map. It is a network protocol. The spaces you dismiss as zones of regional instability are, in fact, proxy laboratories. According to CSIS analysts, these gray zones are deliberately chosen environments for staging and testing asymmetric financial and kinetic attacks before they are deployed against primary targets. The instability is not the story, it is the camouflage. The accelerant is economic. When a state's currency collapses, as seen with Iran's rial hitting 1.47 million per dollar, a mathematical certainty is triggered. That state, facing total insolvency, is forced to pursue asymmetric leverage. This is not theory. This is a blueprint. The failed cyber attack on Poland's power system was a low-cost probe, a test of a systemic vulnerability within a NATO-allied state. The cost of the attack is near zero. The potential liability for the target is infinite. Solvent powers respond with expensive kinetic solutions. The testing of the Golden Dome missile shield is a prime example of this liability trap. It represents a multi-billion-dollar hardware solution to a software-level threat that costs pennies to launch. The enemy is not trying to achieve parity. They are engineering your insolvency by forcing you to build shields while they sharpen digital spears. This is economic warfare disguised as kinetic defense. The gray zone is therefore the critical staging ground where insolvent actors can weaponize the systemic vulnerabilities of their rivals without direct attribution. As RUSI reports confirm, these zones provide the legal and logistical cover to prepare attacks. The warnings about instability in nations from South Africa to Canada are symptoms that these laboratories are active. Prediction: the next vector will not be a border incursion. It will be an attack on a core systemic node, a financial clearinghouse or logistics network launched from a compromised server within a trusted allied nation, creating a solvency crisis for which the only available response is a kinetic escalation against a ghost. The launch on warning doctrine is a Cold War algorithm. It is not a strategy, it is a protocol. If early warning systems, satellites, ground-based radar detect an inbound nuclear strike, you launch your own arsenal before impact. The decision window is minutes. The entire system is built on a single, fragile assumption: the integrity of the data. That assumption is now a systemic liability. Analysts at RUSI and CSIS have modeled the new vector, a cyber attack that doesn't target a city, but targets the senses of the state. A recent massive cyber attack on the Polish power grid, source number 2, was a dress rehearsal. The objective is not to cause a blackout. It is to prove you can blind a NATO member's critical infrastructure at will. This creates the fog of digital war. The commander's radar goes blind. The satellite feed cuts to a no-signal screen. The Golden Dome missile shield, source number 4, reports 0 threats, but the system's sensors are now untrustworthy. Is it a technical failure, or is this the opening salvo of a decapitation strike designed to paralyze the response? This is the asymmetric kill shot. An economically insolvent adversary, like Iran, where the currency has collapsed, source number 1, does not need missile parity. They only need to create an intolerable choice for the solvent power. The commander is now forced to launch based on the absence of data. To wait for confirmation is to risk total annihilation. To launch is to initiate a global exchange based on a potential hack. The enemy has weaponized your own protocol. This is the mathematical certainty of the nuclear dilemma. Economic insolvency is the primary accelerant for asymmetric escalation. As a state's currency collapses, reports cite Iran's currency hitting 1.47 million per dollar. The mathematical imperative to attack shifts from kinetic to systemic. Recent events, such as the massive, though failed, cyber attack on Poland's power system, are not operational defeats. They are data points. They are range-finding exercises for a systemic kill shot. The strategic liability is the opponent's fixation on kinetic defense, evidenced by the testing of systems like the Golden Dome missile shield in key American territories. While the solvent power prepares for incoming ordnance, the insolvent actor prepares to weaponize the system itself. This creates a critical vulnerability gap between kinetic defense and systemic solvency. The calibration forecast. Within 12 months, expect a successful, attribution-impossible cyber attack that triggers a 48 to 72-hour power blackout at a strategic, non-mainland U.S. port. The objective is not destruction, but the calculation of liability. To measure the economic bleed rate and test the political response protocol to an attack with no return address. It is a calibration shot to see if the target has a solvent response to an attack designed to create an intolerable liability.